Am I the biggest Five Nights at Freddy's fan in the world? Nope. But, did I see the first film? Yes. Did I like it? No. But, I could understand why others did. So, I just saw the second film. Did I like it? Nope. But this time, I can't understand why others seem to like it.
But yeah, look at this. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is overall terrible. I mean, it's just nonstop of like these critics saying this movie stinks. Like, it is the worst thing. Why did I waste my time? It goes on and on.
And unfortunately, I simply don't think that that's the movie that they delivered. It just kind of felt like an empty film. That there just wasn't much there at all on any level.
Nobody saw this coming, not even the hardcore fans who had waited years for it. The sequel to Five Nights at Freddy's hit theaters on December 5th, and everyone expected a victory lap, a dark and thrilling follow-up that would finally prove Hollywood could do justice to one of the internet's most beloved horror universes. Within hours of its release, everything fell apart. Critics tore into the film, while fans who had spent years waiting to see the story continue walked out of theaters disappointed, angry, and confused.
Because it basically treats the main plot of the movie as a reveal for the third act. It just feels like we're wandering through subplots kind of aimlessly where so many things are happening, but also it feels like nothing is really happening because nothing is particularly meaningful.
Social media flooded with phrases like, "What did they do to Freddy?" and "They ruined the lore," as Rotten Tomatoes scores collapsed overnight. And before long, the internet had turned the film's name into a meme. This wasn't just a round of bad reviews. What happened was a full-blown backlash. And right in the center of it all stood the man who started everything, Scott Cawthon, the original creator of Five Nights at Freddy's, who suddenly broke his silence. When something you built from nothing gets twisted into something unrecognizable, you either walk away quietly or you fight back. Scott wasn't going to stay quiet this time. Today we're diving deep into the fallout surrounding Five Nights at Freddy's 2, the movie that fans say broke the franchise, and how its creator decided he'd finally had enough. But to understand why this reaction hit so hard, we first need to talk about the hope, the excitement, and the impossible expectations that came before everything crashed down. When the first Five Nights at Freddy's movie released, critics were split, but fans showed up in huge numbers. People watched it because of what it represented, a community project turned Hollywood blockbuster, built off one indie developer's twisted imagination. That first movie created something rare, which was trust. Fans believed the next one would go even deeper into the story, reveal more lore, uncover more secrets, and show more of the haunted machinery that made FNAF what it is. Months before the sequel's release, hype reached insane levels. The trailer dropped and instantly hit trending on YouTube, with people pausing every frame trying to decode clues. Reddit threads blew up overnight as everyone wanted to know who the new animatronics were, what timeline the film would follow, and whether it would finally connect all the hidden storylines from the games. The director teased a darker tone while the producers promised a faithful continuation, and fans let themselves believe it. After all, this was supposed to be the movie that fixed everything. But behind the scenes, something was already off. Leaked reports hinted at creative disagreements between the studio and Scott Cawthon himself. Some insiders claimed Scott wanted to stay true to the game's mystery-heavy storytelling, while the studio wanted a faster, flashier horror film to appeal to casual audiences. Nobody paid much attention at the time because people just wanted to believe. Premiere night arrived, theaters filled, and social media buzzed. For about 30 minutes, everything seemed fine, with the tension, the atmosphere, and the creepy animatronics all feeling right. And that's when the story started unraveling. Characters made no sense, and the pacing felt off. Entire chunks of lore that fans cherished were rewritten or ignored, and what was supposed to be a faithful adaptation turned into something that felt hollow. By the time the credits rolled, excitement had turned into disbelief. Fans didn't even wait for critics to weigh in before they started posting reactions immediately. Tweets like, "This isn't FNAF, this is a cash grab," and "Scott, please fix this," began trending before the second day's showings had even started. As the numbers started rolling in, the situation became clear. This wasn't just a stumble. What unfolded was a disaster in slow motion. Nobody knew just how deep the fallout would go, at least not yet, because the real shock came when the ratings hit. By the morning of December 6th, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 had become the internet's latest cautionary tale. Rotten Tomatoes dropped to 28%, and audience scores weren't much better. Reviewers described it as a soulless sequel, painfully out of touch, and a betrayal of its own source material. YouTube critics were merciless, with thumbnails showing broken broken animatronics and red arrows, while captions screaming, "What happened to FNAF?" flooded the homepage. Metacritic's average score sank so low it became a trending topic on X, and soon every major entertainment outlet was running the same headline: Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is a major letdown. But here's the thing, the most savage criticism didn't come from critics. It came from the fans. The people who had supported Scott Cawthon from day one, who made FNAF what it is today, were the ones leading the charge. They posted side-by-side comparisons of the movie and the original game lore, pointing out every inconsistency while accusing the filmmakers of turning the story into a shallow horror flick that missed the point entirely. Even fan YouTubers who had always defended the franchise started speaking out. One viral video titled "The Movie That Destroyed FNAF" racked up millions of views in just a day. The part that stung most was that people began to wonder if Scott had approved of all this. Comments like, "Scott let them do this?" and "He sold out," flooded his old posts. Fans didn't know that his involvement in the sequel had actually been minimal, or that most of the big creative decisions were made without him. At first, Scott stayed quiet. Criticism was nothing new to him since it came with the territory, but this time felt different. This wasn't just a bad review cycle. This was his life's work, his creation, being torn apart in front of millions. And when one of the studio executives publicly implied that Scott approved the changes, that's when everything changed. That's when Scott Cawthon decided to speak up. And what he said next would turn the internet upside down. For nearly a week, Scott Cawthon said nothing. No statements, no tweets, no interviews, just silence. But that silence only made fans more restless. Every hour that passed brought new theories popping up online. Some believed Scott was furious behind the scenes, trying to get the studio to pull the movie from theaters, while others thought he'd quietly stepped away, too heartbroken to even comment. And that's when something unexpected happened. Scott's personal site, the same one he'd used years ago to tease his game updates, suddenly changed. The homepage went completely black except for a single sentence written in white text: "You can change the story, but you can't erase the truth." Within minutes, screenshots of that line spread like wildfire. Fans flooded Reddit and X, convinced it was a message aimed directly at the movie's creators. That single post reignited everything. Comment sections exploded with support. Longtime followers posted clips of Scott's old interviews, reminding everyone of how much he cared about the lore, the community, and the message behind his games. YouTubers who had grown up on FNAF started releasing emotional videos defending him, saying the movie had betrayed his vision, not the other way around. But that cryptic post wasn't the end of it. Just 2 days later, an industry insider leaked a report claiming Scott had confronted the production team during the final weeks before release. According to the leak, he had begged them to cut certain scenes that didn't align with the original story, and they ignored him. The leak described heated exchanges between Scott and the director over creative control. Apparently, Scott wanted the sequel to explore the human side of the tragedy behind the animatronics, focusing on the pain, the guilt, and the mystery, while the studio wanted more action, more jump scares, and a bigger box office draw. That leak ended with one savage line that fans couldn't stop quoting. Scott walked out of the meeting saying, "This isn't FNAF anymore." That was the moment everything shifted. Fans realized this wasn't just a flop. What they were witnessing was a creative war. The creator of the franchise had tried to protect his story and had been pushed out of the room. When the movie failed, he didn't have to say anything more. That one post, "You can change the story, but you can't erase the truth," said everything. But Scott wasn't done yet. What happened next wasn't just a quiet disagreement. It turned into a full-blown confrontation that had the entire horror community watching every move. In the days that followed, whispers about Scott's confrontation with the filmmakers spread faster than ever. But this time, it wasn't rumor. It was real. Multiple sources close to the project started confirming it. One anonymous crew member even claimed that Scott personally called out the studio executives for commercializing fear and turning his world into a theme park. And it wasn't just a private complaint. According to reports, Scott had directly told the lead producer that the movie's script missed the soul of the franchise. He wasn't angry about money or fame. He was angry because the meaning, the dark emotional weight that made FNAF special, had been stripped away. People close to him said it wasn't a shouting match. It was disappointment. A quiet, cutting kind of disappointment that hit harder than yelling ever could. "You promised to respect the story," Scott allegedly said, "and now it's unrecognizable." The studio, desperate to defend itself, claimed Scott was being too protective. They argued that they needed to evolve the story for modern audiences, wanting explosions, faster pacing, and a cinematic universe. To them, it was just business. To Scott, it was personal. Fans later compared the situation to what happens when a creator's work gets taken over by people who don't feel what made it special in the first place. It was the kind of conflict that every artist fears, watching your creation turned into something that doesn't belong to you anymore. Leaked emails even revealed that Scott had offered to rewrite parts of the script himself, for free, just to make sure the story stayed faithful. The studio declined. They were already too deep in post-production, too focused on release dates and marketing deadlines. When news of those leaks hit social media, fans lost it. Hashtags like #JusticeForScott and #NotMyFNAF2 trended for days. YouTubers made breakdowns of every rumored detail, and comment sections filled with frustration, sadness, and anger. One viral post summed up the mood perfectly. "The man who created our nightmares just had to watch someone else ruin them." That line hit millions. Scott didn't confirm or deny deny the confrontation publicly, but his silence said enough. He'd made his point. The confrontation wasn't about one movie. It was about ownership, respect, and the legacy of a story that changed internet horror forever. But even as the drama spiraled, something even bigger started happening. Something that would turn this controversy into a movement. When fans unite behind a creator, they don't just make noise, they make history. It started small. A few tweets and a few frustrated posts from fans saying Scott was right. But within hours, it turned into a movement. By the end of the week, hashtags like hashtag Justice for Scott, hashtag Not My FNAF2, and hashtag Save the Lore were trending globally. Fan artists flooded social media with drawings of Scott as a puppet master cutting loose tangled studio strings. Others made edits showing split screens. One side labeled Scott's FNAF with eerie lighting and mystery. The other side labeled Hollywood's FNAF 2 with explosions and overacting. It was everywhere, while longtime YouTubers who had built their channels on FNAF lore stepped in too. They uploaded long breakdowns titled They Didn't Listen to Scott, the movie that betrayed its creator, and Why Scott Walked Away. Every video hit millions of views while comment sections turned into battlefields between fans, critics, defenders, and skeptics. Through it all, one truth kept echoing. People didn't just care about the movie, they cared about Scott. For most fans, FNAF wasn't just a franchise, it was a part of their childhood, the series that had terrified them at sleepovers, the story that had sparked thousands of theories, and the mystery that had bonded a community for nearly a decade. The idea that someone had stolen that story, that the studio had twisted it beyond recognition, felt personal. Fan campaigns began calling for a director's cut, one that honored Scott's vision. Petitions circulated online, while even film critics started acknowledging that the controversy had overshadowed the movie itself. But the real turning point came when Scott's old collaborators, small YouTubers, indie developers, and even voice actors from the original games started speaking up. One former collaborator tweeted, "Scott built something sacred, a story about guilt, loss, and fear. That story didn't deserve to be commercialized." It wasn't just another post, it was validation. Proof that the man behind the mask wasn't bitter or controlling. He was protective, and that's what fans loved him for. Within days, the movement had snowballed into something unstoppable. Clips of fans burning fake movie posters went viral on TikTok, and a remix of Scott's mysterious "You Can't Erase the Truth" post turned into a trending audio used in over 500,000 videos. This was no longer about a bad sequel. It had become a rebellion against Hollywood control. But the louder the fans shouted, the more desperate the studio became. And when they finally decided to respond publicly, things went from bad to catastrophic. It took the studio exactly 1 week to issue a statement, and that week was all it took for the internet to turn against them. The message appeared across their official accounts, posted in sleek white text on a black background. It read, "We respect the creative legacy of Five Nights at Freddy's and its creator Scott Cawthon. Every adaptation brings new challenges, and we stand by our team's hard work and creative vision." At first glance, it looked calm and professional, but fans saw right through it. There was no apology and no ownership, no mention of Scott's input being ignored, just corporate language, emotionless, sterile, and carefully worded to avoid blame. Within minutes, the post was ratioed into oblivion. Thousands of comments poured in with responses like, "This isn't respect, it's spin." Others simply replied with Scott's quote, "You can change the story, but you can't erase the truth." It was a PR nightmare. And that's when, just as the fire started to fade away, Scott himself broke his silence again, this time on his verified account. He didn't post a long explanation, a video, or even a thread, just one sentence. "Sometimes you can't recognize your own creation anymore." That was it. No hashtags, no emojis. But those words hit harder than any full statement could. The post racked up millions of likes in hours. Every entertainment outlet covered it, including IGN, Variety, and Deadline. The narrative was no longer about a movie flop. It was about a creator betrayed by his own adaptation. Behind the scenes, insiders claimed that studio meetings had turned chaotic. Marketing campaigns were frozen, while executives reportedly started blaming each other for ignoring Scott's feedback. Some even floated the idea of bringing him back for creative control on future projects, a desperate attempt to win back fan trust. But it was too late. The fans had already made up their minds. The sequel wasn't just a disappointment anymore. It was a warning, a symbol of what happens when passion gets replaced by profit. While the studio tried to control the narrative, Scott's quiet words had already done what no press release could. They turned failure into fuel. Now everyone wanted to know, what would Scott do next? Would he walk away from FNAF for good or take it back entirely? That question would soon spark the biggest twist yet, one that no one, not even the studio, saw coming. The fallout was immediate and irreversible. Ticket sales for Five Nights at Freddy's 2 dropped by nearly 70% in its second weekend. Merch shipments were paused while promotional tie-ins quietly disappeared from storefronts. Even streaming platforms began delaying digital release dates, hoping to let the controversy settle. But the fans weren't letting anything settle. Everywhere you looked, on TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, and X, the same narrative was spreading. Scott was right. The movie wasn't just bad. It was proof that without its creator, FNAF lost its soul. Then something unexpected happened. A few days after his haunting, "I can't recognize my own creation anymore" post, Scott uploaded a message on his personal blog, a longer one this time. It wasn't bitter or angry. It was reflective and honest. He wrote, "FNAF was never about jump scares or big budgets. It was about fear, the quiet kind, the kind that hides behind laughter. I made this story for the people who saw themselves themselves in the darkness and kept playing anyway. It wasn't a statement, it was a confession. In just a few paragraphs, Scott reminded everyone why they'd loved his work in the first place. He ended with one final line that hit the internet like a bombshell. If they won't tell the story right, I will. That was all it took. Within hours, hashtags like hashtag FNAF reclaimed and hashtag Scott is back began trending. Fan forums lit up with theories, wondering if he was hinting at a new game, a reboot, or maybe an independent animated project. No one knew for sure, but everyone was watching. Meanwhile, journalists began reporting that the studio's leadership was in chaos. Some executives reportedly blamed the director for antagonizing the fan base, while others blamed marketing. But one insider claimed that Scott's post had sparked internal talks about letting him regain creative control for future installments, even if it meant scrapping existing plans. And the irony? The same movie that was supposed to cement FNAF as a Hollywood franchise had instead exposed the exact reason it never should have been one. The fans didn't want a sanitized blockbuster. They wanted Scott's vision. As the backlash faded into a strange, electric quiet, one truth became clear. The brand might have taken a hit, but Scott's legacy had never been stronger. He had confronted the system and somehow won. But this wasn't just a victory for one man. It was something bigger. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's 2 will be remembered not for its box office numbers or its critics' scores, but for what it revealed about art, control, and the people who refused to let their creations be twisted. Scott Cawthon didn't scream. He didn't launch a lawsuit or wage a public feud. He did something far more powerful. He let truth speak louder than profit, and that truth resonated. Whether you're a creator, a fan, or someone who's ever poured your heart into something only to see it misunderstood, Scott's story hits a nerve. It's a reminder that passion still matters, even in an industry obsessed with numbers and trends. The irony is poetic. The movie that was meant to destroy his creation ended up reviving it. Fan projects started gaining traction again, from remakes to tribute games to animation shorts that looked more FNAF than the multi-million-dollar film ever did. Independent creators started proudly labeling their work as inspired by Scott Cawthon's original vision. It wasn't rebellion, it was respect. And maybe that's the real ending here. Not the collapse of a sequel, but the rebirth of a movement. No matter how big the industry gets, it can't buy authenticity. It can't buy emotion. It can't buy the connection between a creator and their fans. Scott Cawthon didn't need to fight in court or on red carpets. He fought by reminding people what mattered. In doing so, he turned a failed movie into a cultural turning point. As fans continue to speculate about what's next, whether it's a reboot, a game, or something completely unexpected, one thing's for sure: Scott has already reclaimed what was his. Because at the end of the day, they can change the story, but they can't erase the truth. And that's the story of how Five Nights at Freddy's 2 went from one of the most anticipated sequels in horror history to the movie that reminded everyone who really owns the story. If you've ever cared about FNAF, if you've ever believed in creators who fight for their vision, this is your reminder. Sometimes failure isn't the end. Sometimes it's the wake-up call that brings the truth back to life. Because if Scott Cawthon has taught us anything, it's that no matter how dark things get, the story isn't over.